Folks, welcome back. As promised, my guest is Avner Boskey, not to be confused with Abner Boskey, who I don't know if he exists, but he's not my guest. My guest is Avner Boskey, who is this moment as I speak to him in Israel, in Beersheba. Avner, welcome.
It's good to be with you in Manhattan.
I got to tell you, I'm always stunned that I could be having a conversation with somebody many thousands of miles away in Israel. You are a writer, you're a musician, um, you're a friend of my dear friend Ken Fish, which is how you come to my attention through Ken. How did you get to know Ken Fish? Let's start there because I'm always fascinated how people meet.
It's something like 36 years ago. We came from Israel just after the first Gulf War, and we had been invited by a fellow named Jack Deere, who used to work with John Wimber, to come and do an internship in Anaheim. And when I asked the Lord in Israel, where do you want me to focus? I got the word placentia. And placentia is not a maternity ward. Placentia was where Ken Fish was living. And we discovered that later on. So we ended up becoming really good friends going back to 1991.
Now, wait a second. First of all, I'm friends with Jack Deere. And so that's so interesting. I didn't know that. You mentioned John Wimber. I didn't have the honor of being a friend of John Wimber, but a great admirer of John Wimber and the Vineyard movement. So you're one of those crazy Christians. And I just want to say thank you for being a member of the crazy club, of which I also am a secret member. I would never say that publicly, but that's so extraordinary. Did you just say now that you got a word from God? You get that word from God, placentia, or did I miss? I think maybe I
It,
misheard you.
no, you did. It was a wordlet, just a little word.
A little, but I mean I love when I hear things like that, because what an amazing, even if somebody is not a believer, what would they say? You're lying, you made that up. I mean, it's kind of amazing. You get a word and it turns out to be, oh yes, God was speaking to me. And why does God do that? In part to encourage us that he's real and he wants to lead us and guide us. So what is your story before we get into the larger issue of why Christians should stand with Israel, which I believe is true, and I want to talk about that. But what is your story? Where did you grow up? How did you come to faith? How did that happen?
I have an interesting story. I guess everyone does, but I certainly do. I was born in Montreal. My mother was a communist spy. My father was a member of the party in the States who had to flee with the FBI chasing him. He went to fight in Spain against Franco, the fascists, and then he ended up joining the U.S. Army. He was a wrestler in Mexico for 5 years, El Chimpanzé.
Okay, now
And
you're making stuff up. This is a serious program, Avner. Come on. Wait, who was a communist spy?
my mother.
Yeah, but everybody's mother was a communist spy. No, seriously, that's you've already thrown in a couple of amazing things. Your mother's a communist was a communist spy. No kidding. Your father ended up being a wrestler in Mexico
That's correct. He wore a
named
leather
what?
El Chimpanzé. He had a leather mask, and he only took it off 3 times in like 2 years of wrestling. When you lose, you got to take your mask off. It's kind of like Darth Vader.
And he was called the chimpanzee.
That's correct.
And
Yes,
that was a
indeed.
good thing, I guess.
Yes, it was. It was very different than living in the Lower East Side.
This is so crazy. Okay, so keep going. How did you come to faith?
So I was raised to be a communist until about 1968. And there was something called the Russian invasion of Ukraine. No, it wasn't. It was Czechoslovakia in Prague, the Prague Spring. And
We're not
when,
talking Russia, we're talking the Soviet Union. They're different, by the way, in case you're scoring at home.
yes, indeed. And what happened is I realized that not all was right in the state of Denmark. And so I began to question, is the Marxist perspective of changing economic influences going to change the human heart? And that led me on a search. At that time, we had Timothy Leary and Jimi Hendrix and all kinds of people. And that led me on a search through unlicensed pharmacy to discover the reality of spirit issues. And again, in those days, our generation thought everything about the spirit was good. And I began to realize no, I began to meet actually some Satanists and other people and realized that there are bad things in the spirit world too. And I met a guy who was from Holland. He had been in the Dutch underground. And he said, he saw me reading occult books. He said, "What are you reading that foolishness for? You're a Jewish person. You should be getting to know the God of Israel and the Messiah of Israel." And this was a shock to me because every church I went into, Jesus looked like he was from Northern Europe, not from the Middle East. And I'd never heard of a personal relationship either. So eventually I ended up reading a book that said that the most significant event in the 20th century was the return of the Jewish people to their promised land according to the words of the Hebrew prophets. And I ended up getting to the point of asking God if this was real to show me personally. And I had a very powerful encounter on the sitting on the back of the bus.
Were you literally on a bus
Yes, indeed.
and you had an encounter with God on the back of a bus?
I was actually in an island in Montreal called Ile Jésus, the island of Jesus,
On a bus.
on a bus, the magic bus.
It's pretty, sounds pretty magic.
Yeah.
Um, so you had an encounter. Can you say more about that?
Well, I decided to ask God if all this stuff was true. And I said, if this is true, and Yeshua, that's the name his mother used to call him. We call him Jesus in the rest of the world. If he is the Messiah and if he died on the cross for me, then would you come into my life and forgive my sins? And all of a sudden, boom, the Holy Spirit just entered me like hot oil, filled me right up. And I realized three things right away. No one was talking to me, just God's presence was there. And I realized this is what I'm created for. If I die, I'm going to be with him forever. And now my life makes sense. That was the beginning.
That's so beautiful. What year was that?
It was May 24th, 1974, 4 years after I first did LSD on the day.
Wow. um, I if people want to find you, they can go to Final Frontier Ministries. Is that right?
No, that they would look a long time for that. They'd go to davidstent.org.
davidstent.org.
Yeah.
But you're affiliated with Final Frontier Ministries?
That's our ministry, but it's too long to use as a email address.
Okay, so davidstent.org.
Hmm.
Okay, so Avner, I wanted to talk to you about I was just amazed when I became a believer. I really, I said to the born again friends that I had made, help me understand the faith. What's what? And I pretty quickly picked up some basic things, you don't have sex outside of marriage, which I already knew pretty quickly. You're against killing the unborn. We love Israel, kind of like the stuff that I didn't believe before, but now I thought, so what are some of these things that you Christians believe? And I was fascinated by the love for Israel. I thought that's so interesting because I think a lot of people would paint Christians as the enemies of Jews or Israel, and all these people who love Jesus love Israel. And so it's been a strange thing suddenly to see, after October 7th, how many people who think of themselves as Christians siding with the Palestinians or rehearsing what they believe are the evils of the Israeli government. And it's been a very divisive time. And I've always been amazed because I thought, this is not complicated, standing with the Jews. This doesn't mean I agree with everything in the Jewish faith. I mean, I believe in Jesus. Maybe Benjamin Netanyahu does not, but that's a separate issue. Tucker Carlson invited Senator Ted Cruz from Texas onto his program. And Ted Cruz said the same kind of basic thing. He's like, I was raised, you stand with Israel. And he got such pushback from Tucker, and Tucker can sometimes be dismissive in an unpleasant way, and was really challenging Ted Cruz. Like, well, what does that mean? He was just very, he wasn't really giving him an opportunity to answer that question. And so I thought I'd love to give you an opportunity to talk about that with me. So when we come back, folks, I'm talking to Avner Boskey, and you can find him at davidstent.org. We'll be right back. Hey, folks, welcome back. I'm talking to Avner Boskey. He's with davidstent.org. If you want to find him, davidstent.org. But so, Avner, I was just saying, help my audience understand, what is it when we say, I believe in Jesus. I'm a follower of Jesus. The Bible is my book. Why should I stand with Israel? And what does that mean? Because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding what that means.
I had a teacher once whose name was Hendricks. It wasn't Jimmy. It was a guy named Howard Hendricks. And he used to say a text, without a context is a pretext. And I think that's one of the things that so many believers, people who call themselves Christians, don't always know the Bible. For instance, you mentioned Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson. What does the scripture say? This is so important. Genesis 12:3, that they argued over. It says in Hebrew, I will bless those who bless you, and the one who dishonors you, I will curse. That's the Hebrew, mikalalecha, the one who treats you lightly, who dismisses you. And people like Tucker or even Candace would say that refers now to Christians. But actually, if you go to Numbers 23, you'll see Balaam, the famous wizard from Mesopotamia. He says, how pleasant are your tents, O Jacob. Blessed is everyone who blesses you, Jacob. So it's the same people. So that promise God gave to the Jewish people, it's a protective promise. It's the good news and the bad news. If you bless the Jews, you're blessed. And if you even ignore them or diss them, you're cursed. That's kind of the beginning. And the reason I think, Eric, sometimes it's so difficult for many people is because we're really influenced by what you would call Hellenism, Greek culture, the concept that what's really wonderful is the concept, but not on earth. But Jesus said, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And that's the whole concept, that God is going to redeem this earth and the people he's chosen as his firstborn. And so when we talk about the firstborn, that's something that most people haven't ever thought about, but it's very, very biblical.
Well, I can understand both sides of this, and yet I agree with you. But there are people, who just don't get this. Like, I can understand Tucker saying, what do you mean? Because Tucker is not an evangelical. He did not grow up in the church. So when he says he's a Christian who has not been inside the faith for very long. And there's so much he doesn't know. And that became very clear in that interview and at other times, that he didn't get the memo that we Christians, we stand with the Jews. He didn't get that memo. And so he was baffled by it, and in some ways hostile to it. But I think, to give him the benefit of the doubt, you'd want to say to somebody like that, listen, I understand why you don't understand this. I understand your confusion. How do we help them with that confusion? In other words, because they would say, well, what does it mean that I stand with Israel or with the Jews? In other words, what are we asking people to see?
Well, I think it starts with the heart of God, because God says in Deuteronomy 7 that the reason he chose the Jewish people is because he loves them. And it's really fascinating. If you go back one chapter, Deuteronomy 6, you get the Shema, which is, you will love the Lord your God with all your heart. And then God turns around one chapter later and says, and I love Israel. And so if you know how it is, so many theologians, They live in their heads. So many even newscasters live in their heads. But God is saying this is also an issue of the heart. I love this people. And I think we need to start there. If we don't get that, we'll go far. We'll go far. But they say in Yiddish, you can travel a long way on a lie, but you can never come home. Some things in the church that's happened over the past 1800 years. It started with Marcion, and then it continued with people like Justin and Origen, and it's some which we call today replacement theology. Some of your guests have mentioned this before. Replacement theology says basically God couldn't wait to get rid of the Jews. He actually loves Gentiles more. So you got this competition going on. But God said, actually, I choose the Jews so that they can be a servant to the nations and teach people about who God is, what he feels, what he thinks. He gave us the Bible to pass it on to the nations. He gave us the Messiah to pass it on to the nations. So we can't really say Christ is king and forget that Jesus is the king of the Jews. They go together. Can't separate them.
It's so interesting because this is nuanced. I can see people just not getting it. But part of it really is, I would say that it's kind of like a parent with a child. You say, I love my child. And somebody says, well, let me tell you about your child. Your child is a drug addict and they're stealing from the neighbors and they're a wicked person. And you'd say, well, even if that's true, I love my child. In fact, I may love my child more because it breaks my heart. That's how much I love my child. And so God's love for Israel doesn't mean God approves of what every Jew does in history or of what the Israeli government does. It's a different thing than that.
And
And
this is what Paul was saying in Romans 1 and 2. He said, not only do Jews sin, but Gentiles sin too. And he said, actually, everybody sins, and so everybody's under condemnation. What anti-Semitism is, though, is doing a double standard and saying the Jews are the greatest sinners.
that's about right. We're going to go to a break, folks. I'm talking to Avner Boskey. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Talking to Avner Boskey. We're talking about Israel, the Jews, the Gentiles. Keep going, Avner. You're saying a lot of important things.
I think that we have to start with the heart of God. For some reason, he puts somebody in first place in the sense of firstborn. Think about Joseph. Joseph had 11 brothers, and his father, Jacob, really liked Joseph. And his brother said, whatever dad wants, we totally agree with this. You know, he loves Joseph. That's fine by us. We love Joseph to death. And that's what they did. They sold him to some Ishmaelites, took him to Egypt, and they said, now we're rid of him. The issue of the calling of the Jewish people often creates similar responses with people. They say, why the Jews? And somebody once said, why the Jews? What is it? How odd of God to choose the Jews, but not so odd as those who choose the Jewish God and hate the Jews.
I never heard the second part of that. How odd of God to choose the Jews. Say it again.
But not so odd as those who choose the Jewish God and hate the Jews.
Well, it's
What's
interesting. I
interesting?
think it really comes down to jealousy in many cases, right? And also a misunderstanding. To be chosen, it doesn't mean you're better. It's really a burden to be chosen by God. Any prophet that is chosen by God. When I was writing my book on Bonhoeffer, I saw this because I think he's writing about Jeremiah. It's a horrible thing in some ways to be chosen by God. You say, no, Lord, don't choose me. Don't choose me, because I know if you choose me, you're calling me to suffer. You're calling me to have a responsibility that others don't have. But if you choose me, I accept. And that's the point. We know that not every Jew accepts the idea that God has chosen the Jews for his purposes. Nonetheless, God has chosen the Jews for his purposes. I think that in many cases you get people who don't understand that, and they think it means, oh, the Jews are special, like they're better. It's like, no, that's not what it is to be chosen by God. It's a grave burden to be chosen by God. It's an honor. but it's a burden. And I think that people, maybe they think that, yeah, that to say the gods, that the Jews are God's chosen means they're, oh, they're special, they're better. It's like, no, no, folks, you're missing it. That's not really what it means to be chosen. And as you said, Avner, the Jews were chosen to show the Gentiles the way to God. I mean, they were chosen for God's purposes by God. Um, and it must dismay you, as a Jew living in Israel, to see the anti-Semitism that we're seeing. I have to say it has absolutely shocked me. Since I wrote the book on Bonhoeffer, I just couldn't dream that I would see this kind of thing.
By the way, I really enjoyed your book. It was given to me by my mother-in-law many years ago, and really enjoyed it. And it's a good word, especially now when so many people are getting challenged in terms of, are we willing to stand for what's right when it gets hard? There's an old line in Fiddler on the Roof where Tevye says to God in his informal praying, and he says, God, you've chosen us out of all the peoples on the face of the earth. Just for once, why don't you choose somebody else? See, so many Jewish people don't understand this issue because they say either way, the nations are going to get angry at us. If we win the war, they'll get angry at us. If we lose the war, they'll say a eulogy. But, what do we stand for? I grew up without believing in God. My father was a cantor. He was a cantor in the U.S. Army, and he loved singing, but he didn't believe in God. And yet when he sang, he was touching something deep inside that didn't come out in the rest of his life. So I think many Jewish people, they're afraid of, if I believe in God, what does it mean? Am I primitive? Am I going to be rejected? Who is God? And so I think many Jewish people are asking that question. And of course, as believers in Yeshua, in Jesus the Messiah, we have something to share with. And that's how I came to faith. We're less than 1% of the world, you know, and God uses us and says, I'm still going to use you. This is the amazing thing. It's kind of like a marriage covenant. He never forgets. He has that one kiss in Ezekiel 16. He says, that's it. They're going to be my firstborn. They're not the only ones in the family, but they're my firstborn.
Yeah, it is extraordinary. And I think that, again, if you love Jesus, just the idea that he was a rabbi, he came to fulfill the Old Testament. He was the fulfillment. And so the more I learn about the Old Testament, the more I understand Jesus. So I think you have a lot of people, and this goes back 2,000 years, who are somehow trying to create a Christianity that's divorced from the Old Testament. And by the way, who tried to do that? The Nazis. A Christianity that's divorced from the Old Testament is satanic. Let's say it that
We're
way.
seeing, believe it or not only the Institute for the Getting Rid of Jews that you're talking about, which happened in Eisenbach in Germany, but you're having that again now on American radio and television of people saying, I'm a Christian, but the Jews are demonic. It's the same type of thing, and it goes all the way back to Marcion, and it goes back actually to Revelation 12. Uh,
Didn't Candace Owens say something like that?
yeah, you know what I say? I forget people's names.
But in all seriousness, when I hear her say stuff like that, I think I'm shocked. I'm shocked because it's one thing for somebody to say, I disagree with the IDF's policies and they did this and something like, well, then maybe we can have something to talk about. But to say some of the things that she said, I thought, wow, this is bad. This is really.
There was an actor years ago, Mel Gibson, and his father was involved with a certain group in Australia and England. And I believe Candace may also, through marriage, be involved in the same group. I forget the name of the group. And the point behind it is they are feeding on some sources, some dark, polluted wells of anti-Semitism that go back. And again, once Jonathan Kahn was on your program and he talked about Revelation 12 and the dragon concept there. Satan is the one who, whatever God chooses to love, Satan chooses to hate. And that's the issue here.
Yeah,
It's not as much as a political issue, it's a spiritual issue which has political ramifications.
we'll be right back. Welcome back. Talking to Avner Boskey. You can find him at davidstent.org. So, Avner, just a few minutes, and I'm sorry I only have a few minutes, but you mentioned Mel Gibson, his father. There are certain Catholic groups, they're fringe, let's say, that kind of buy into some of this crazy stuff. They don't represent the Catholic Church, but I think you did mention Mel Gibson's father, and Mel Gibson at one point went on some drunken rant about the Jews. And it's so disheartening to hear someone that you love and respect in so many ways and admire give voice to something like that, which I think is demonic.
I'll tell you the good news. It's wonderful that there's some Gentiles who do love the Jews. Not all the Gentiles feel that way, like some of these terrible things happened. You go back to Zechariah 2, verse 8, and it says that God looks at the world through the apple of his eye, through the Jewish people. And when you think about how the enemy has raged for a long time. I mean, you start with God talking to Abraham, right? We started this discussion about God talking to people, hearing God's voice. That's how it all began, God talking to Abraham. And then very soon you have Pharaoh, who says, I'm going to destroy the seed of Israel. I want genocide against the Jewish people. And what's kind of ironic today is you've got Hamas, which is trying to destroy the Jewish people, yet they're accusing Israel of genocide, and the world is buying it. So the world is voting for Pharaoh when God is voting for Israel. Things haven't changed that much. Plus que ça change, plus que ça reste la même, they say in Turkish.
In Greek, it's plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose.
There you go.
I believe that's the Greek. Yes. So, well, no, this is what I keep coming back to is that through history, you see all these different groups wanting to kill all the Jews. And I think that's got to say something. If you know nothing, the idea that these disparate groups would want to murder all the Jews, why? I mean, it seems like the Jews are chosen by Satan for destruction. Why? Because God loves them and Satan hates what God loves. It's not that complicated. I mean, there are even people who don't seem to see the creation of the state of Israel in 1948 as miraculous. And I think that's amazing. So you just think this is some group that has hung out, since the beginning of time. I mean, where's the Hittite state? It's such an amazing thing that it becomes a state, and it's so beautiful. And so I have to, say to me that this is the kind of thing that makes me say, you've got to be kidding if you don't see that there is something that God is doing here. We just got 30 seconds, Avner, final word.
A dear friend of mine once said, God offends the mind to reveal the heart. And I think that's what's going on with the Jewish people. God has put his seal on them. He's not only loving them in the past and present, he's got plans, as Bob Dylan would say, of his own to set up his throne when he returns, and it's going to be Jerusalem. So there's a lot still coming with the Jewish people, and maybe another time we'll get a chance to get into that.
Well, I would like to have you back to continue the conversation. That would be a joy. So let's just plan on that. And in the meantime, thank you, folks. If you would like to know more, you can go to davidstent.org, davidstent.org. Avner, thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Eric. It's good to be with you.